Hey everyone. Since I wasn't able to be in church yesterday to worship with you all, I did want to use this method to kind of share with you some thoughts about Charlie Kirk's murder. Um, I've I'm sure many of you feel the same way. I think part of the surprise for a lot of people is we feel surprised by how deeply we feel this, um, the anger, the grief that can overwhelm us sometimes. And I want to say that's good and right. I've seen some pushback, I think, from just very foolish ideas. People say that you know it's a bad sign that we're so upset about this. I heard one guy, well-meaning, I'm sure, but exceptionally foolish guy say, "Hey, people are killed all the time. Even Christians they're martyred every day around the world, and it's always a tragedy. And so it's a little suspect if we care more about the murder of Charlie Kirk than we do about any other murder that's in the news." This is a pretty stupid idea, and it's good and right that we feel it so deeply. For example, read in the book of Acts, chapter 8, where Stephen is martyred. And Stephen is martyred, and the Bible says that those who buried him made they deeply mourned him. They buried him and they deeply mourned him. There's some people that their death we feel very deeply. Obviously, our own family members, like the death of a close friend or family member will hit us much harder than the death of some person we've never met before. And so the circumstances of Charlie's death and who he was should affect us as Christians, even if we never met him, even if, like me, you didn't spend a lot of time listening to Charlie Kirk, didn't listen to his show or anything. I saw some videos of him from time to time speaking on campuses and was always impressed by his answers that he gave to people. So why do we feel it so deeply, and why is it right that we feel it so deeply? First of all, is because he was beloved by so many. In other words, he was well known. And that means there's so many people who are hurting. It's because he's been taken away from so many people. So all those connections lead to hurt. Because he was murdered. That he didn't die in a peaceful way, that he died, that his life was taken. It was cut short violently because of the aggravated circumstances of that murder. Because it was violent, because it was public, because it was in front of his children. It was more shocking than most deaths. Because of the motive of the murderer. We know that for someone to want to kill Charlie Kirk, and we're still learning more about the full motivation for the killer, but it's very obvious that it was a murder driven by hatred. And so that's something that shocks us and deeply affects us. Because we identify, as we'll talk to you about in a second, we identify with Charlie in holding the same positions that he held. And because he was so good, because he was a good man. And because he was a good man with so many virtues and qualities that are admirable and worth admiring, we feel the tragedy of his death very deeply than we would if a person that we weren't aware of such virtue. Because he was so young, because of his family, because he represented us and our nation. These are all reasons we feel it more deeply. He represented something. He was part of a movie. He was working for something. And because of the loss to the cause, because he was working for something that we cared about. And it's a terrible loss. And, of course, not least because of the celebration of the wicked. When evil men rejoice, God's people mourn. Their victory is a loss for us. So I've heard a lot of good things. Anyway, I think that's a pretty, fringe thing. I only say all that to kind of help us think through why is it that we feel it so deeply, and why is that good and right. I've heard a lot of good things. I just want to make one addition to the conversation. It's just I've heard it slightly less, and I would just call it a case for Christians rejecting calls for peace and unity in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. In other words, there's people who say, that's a terrible thing that's happened. What we really need right now is peace and unity in our country. And I want to say that not only is it acceptable for Christians to reject, as Christians, that we reject those calls as Christian citizens, but it's actually good and wise and righteous for us to reject those calls. And people have noticed this. President Trump, Vice President Vance, and Erica Kirk herself, all of the statements that they've made after this event have all been remarkable for not including these calls for peace and unity and putting this all behind us. They've not done that. And some people have been upset by that, but I want to say I think that is the morally courageous and the right thing to do right now. Now, as Christians, we're very eager. I think so, and this is right, it's good, that as Christians, we immediately identify that love and that willingness to forgive and that quickness to embrace our enemies and to overlook wrongs done. We identify that as Christ-likeness, and we can immediately think of many, many verses. And all of those verses are personal challenges to us and ways that we do need to grow in our likeness to our Lord. We're very susceptible then to people who say, hey, let's tone down the rhetoric. Let's be united like we used to be in the good old days. Let's make peace. We as Christians are extremely susceptible to those calls. We're quick to believe them. We're suckers for it. We'll fall for it over and over again. And I want to say that we should not do that. And the first point I would make in building that case is to say, Charlie did not die in some kind of a freak accident, like a car accident or something. This was not a random act of violence. It was clearly representative of something. In other words, someone who was on a team, someone who was part of a cause, someone who was part of something bigger than themselves, someone who was a soldier in a movement is the person who pulled the trigger. And the way that you can so obviously tell that's the case is by the shocking number of people who are celebrating Charlie's death, who positively endorse it as a good thing that has happened. And if you refuse to see this, if you talk about or if you think about Charlie's death if you talk about it in the same way that you would talk about someone who died in a car accident or some other freak accident, you're either being willfully and stubbornly blind, or maybe just really truly out of ignorance, blind to a pattern that's going on, right? There's something that's happening. This person that succeeded in killing Charlie Kirk is on the same team as the person that pulled the trigger to attempt to kill President Trump just last year. So, there's this tendency to feel like, hey, well, all that matters is we get the killer. We get him, we got the killer. Okay, now it's time to move on. And the rest of us all need to make peace. So you get the killer. But, I think one way to think about this is like if you had a loved one who was killed because they got on the wrong side of the mob, or they got on the wrong side of like a gang, a criminal gang. And the police said, hey, don't worry about it. We have apprehended the killer, the person who pulled the trigger. And you know enough about the situation to say, well, yeah, but he wasn't really acting alone. He may have been the person who was holding the gun, but there were co-conspirators who helped plan this, who helped set it up. There was people who were funding the whole operation. There was bosses up above that, my loved one was on the wrong side of, and that's what led to this. There's people who are recruiting for this gang. There's corrupt leaders and enablers who have legitimate positions, but they're using their power to enable this criminal network. You would say justice is not done until all those who have been complicit or who have been co-conspirators, who've helped this to happen, until all of them have been brought to justice, until all of them have been punished to the degree of their guilt, right? And you would not mistake anything less than that for justice. So my point is, why do we reject calls for peace and unity? Well, we reject them to whatever extent justice has not yet been done. There is an enemy in our land. And I'm a little astonished how often I hear people talking about this situation as if this is the act of a lone gunman. Yes, it's a very, very sad thing, but the important thing is we've caught this guy, and now it's important for the rest of the country to make peace. You haven't even come close to getting all the people who have blood in their hands. You haven't even started to round up all the people who have guilt in this matter. There's an enemy, there's a side, there's a cause, there's a force in our world. We shouldn't be, it would be very foolish for us to be blind to the existence of this enemy. One thing I would say is, be careful not to give a reason for peace and unity now that would equally apply to any conflict that our nation has ever been in. I mean, from the Revolutionary War on. If you say, yes, it's very, very bad, this violent thing has happened, but the important thing is that we keep the peace. That could equally have been said about any crisis or conflict in the past, whatever. If no matter how much violence piles up, no matter how much injustice piles up, if you just keep on saying, no, the important thing is we turn the other cheek, that we make peace, that we forgive, that we move on, that we accept the situation, then you can pretend that you would have had moral clarity. I just think what's going on. You can pretend that you would have had moral clarity during the War for Independence, but you wouldn't have. You could pretend that you would have had moral clarity during the Civil War. You would not have. You can pretend that you would have moral clarity in the fight for the abolition of slavery or whatever cause. You would not. You would not have moral clarity if you don't have moral clarity now. If you can't identify an enemy force in our land. I think part of the problem is that it's a domestic force. If Charlie, there's a thought experiment. If Charlie had been assassinated by somebody who was an agent of a terror network somewhere in the Middle East, I think we would all probably have a little bit more clarity about this. And then our leaders say, we have identified all the leaders of this terror network, and we are going to begin to carry out surgical strikes to dismantle this terrorist network. I think everybody would be like, that's great, go get them. But the problem is these people are embedded, this side or this cause or this force that we're talking about is a domestic force. It is a terrorist force, but it is a domestic terror force. And the truth is we have gone to war with terrorists for far less provocation than we have endured in recent years. Okay. So I think it's, obviously I don't think people really think that no matter what provocation comes, we should not deal with this threat, or they wouldn't say something like, there's only one killer that's responsible. But what we're really saying is this is an acceptable loss to us. Okay, we lost Charlie. Charlie was killed. President Trump was almost killed. Maybe 6 months from now, someone else will be killed. But it's just one here, one there. In other words, we're saying the losses that this enemy has inflicted on us have not yet become unendurable or unacceptable. In other words, I'm not ready to upset the status quo of life in the United States because the losses have not been have not yet been that serious. And I want to say, my reason for this video is to say, I think we should reject that thinking entirely. There is this, does really exist, a loose ideological coalition, and they are fighting for their ideas. Now, I don't mean the Democratic Party. I don't think that everybody who's voted for Democrats, or even every member of the Democratic Party, is part of this coalition of evil, this syndicate of evil. Though, of course, their organization has been put to work in service of this system and given them, has given them as a party a degree of culpability here. They have a degree of guilt. Now, I think I've heard some people say this. Well, Charlie wouldn't want us. Charlie wouldn't want us to fight. First of all, I'm not sure that's true. I don't know enough about Charlie and the different positions he had to know whether or not what he would counsel us to do in this situation. But the truth is, as many have pointed out, like Charlie had a unique position on the team. He was the person that was out there on the front line, sort of like an ambassador, trying to engage the other side, trying to negotiate, trying to come to terms, trying to build a bridge of understanding between two mutually opposing sides. And when you send a messenger to negotiate with the enemy, and he is assassinated, you are a fool to suggest sending another messenger. In other words, the situation has evolved. The situation has changed. What was a good gesture yesterday is a stupid one today. And by the way, I wouldn't say at all that we should stop sending Charlie Kirks out there. We've seen many people promise or predict, hope for, wish for the rise of 1,000 or 10,000 Charlie Kirks. That's wonderful, excellent. And I would say that is not opposed to what not many would suggest needs to be done right now. And again, what I'm mainly saying is I want to talk about how we as Christians look at this. And is it acceptable for us as Christians to reject those calls for peace and unity and to advocate a different kind of solution? But before I say what this, just as a reminder, the person who pulled the trigger and killed Charlie Kirk would have described himself as a soldier in a cause. Or would describe himself as a soldier in a cause. And what does that cause represent? I want to talk about what they represent, what they're for, what damage they're doing to us. Because again, you might be tempted to say, well, it's very sad. They shoot somebody once a year. They try to shoot somebody once a year. It's very sad, but, are we really going to go to war over that? Well, I'm going to tell you what they're doing to us. They're teaching our children to hate us. This cause that I'm talking about. Teaching our children to hate us. They're mutilating children, aborting children. They are celebrating perversion, celebrating it. They are wishing for the downfall of our country. They are defiling the heritage of our nation. They're blaspheming our God. They are cheering for violence upon our president and our leaders. They are slandering us as racists and bigots. And of course, that's just another name for their enemy, which is us. They want to take away our civil and religious liberties. That's what they're doing to us. This is a real group of people. They would vote yes on all of those things we just said. That is what they stand for. They really do exist. And the person who killed Charlie Kirk is just part of that. So there's this evil syndicate, this evil criminal syndicate. And you say, well, how big is it? I have no idea. I'm sure any of you may have opinions about this or would be able to give a much better opinion about it. I mean, clearly it's at least in the hundreds of thousands. I don't think it's anywhere close to half of our country or even, like I said, all the people that voted for the Democratic Party or whatever. It's probably several million strong in our country. And, I could be underestimating it. I could be overestimating. I really don't know, and nor do I know how you could begin to measure it. But it is clear that the members of this syndicate even though loosely affiliated. I'm not saying there's some, secret, underground organization or whatever. It's an ideological coalition. And these few millions of people, however many they may be, who are currently outing themselves, by the way, by cheering for the murder of Charlie Kirk, they are embedded in respectable roles in our society, as this is being discovered this week. Unfortunately, many of them are being fired. They're embedded in respectable roles in government, in education, even in the military, and in business. So they're there, and they're not people that we can ignore. They may be few as a percentage of our country, but they are an army, and they're motivated, and they have positions of power. And so for people who call us to unity, it's like we can't. Where does that come from? I think a lot of us have fond memories of if you remember after September 11th in 2001, there really was a feeling of the nation coming together. Obviously, if you think about it for a second, obviously part of that was we are facing a foe from without who had attacked us, and it seemed to sort of relativize all of our political differences inside. And so it felt like the nation could kind of come together to respond to this exterior threat and say, let's not get political, let's just fight against our enemy. But now we're dealing with a domestic foe. It's a foe at home. And the problem is indeed a political problem. What unity can we have with such people? If you haven't seen Vice President Vance, who appeared on Charlie Kirk's show today, or maybe it was yesterday, and he stated it very clearly and very strongly that there can be no unity with this sort of coalition of evil. And those who call for it are being naive at best, and they're being foolish. What is national? Think about it. When you think of being unified as a people, what are you even thinking? I know me, I'm always imagining standing side by side with people singing our national anthem together. These are people that hate our national anthem, who lobby for it to be replaced or have alternate versions of it. Does it look like celebrating our national heritage? Well, they hate our national heritage. They have condemned our past. Does it look like, maybe it looks like worshiping together? Well, no, they don't share our religion. They've abandoned it and they blaspheme it. Well, maybe national unity looks like holding to a shared national ethos, like that we have a similar view of what's right and wrong. No, they have subverted that and they have perverted it. We do not share a common view of the good, of right and wrong with them. So we do not want to be united to such people. We don't want to be united to them. We have no wish for that to be absorbed into the fabric that is America. Instead, we want it plucked out entirely. Charlie's been described as his murder has been called a political assassination, and many Christians have been quick to call him a martyr. And if that seems surprising to you, I want you to think about that for a second. The reason that Charlie was hated and ultimately why he was killed was not because of his political viewpoints, except in a very roundabout way. The positions that Charlie was most hated for and became the target of violence for are what we might call historical Christian positions. If you are a Bible-believing Christian, then you agree with Charlie about virtually every issue that his opponents hated him for. And that's why they hated him. That's why they wanted him dead. And this is why, a lot of people were very eager to hear churches speak about this. And it is fitting. It was fitting for pastors to talk about it. I'm not here to say how they should have done it or how they should have handled it, but it was fitting, at least. It was appropriate for pastors to talk about it because he's our brother in Christ. Our brother in Christ was murdered. And I have seen, in some circles, a shocking lack of concern that our brother in Christ was killed for representing what we claim to believe. Some people have said stuff like, well, I think one way to address it is like, again, people are saying like, oh, such a shocking thing to see this, and he had a family too. It's just a tragedy that he was murdered. Well, that's better than talking about it like it was an accident. Okay, some people talk about it like it was just an accident, and then other people talk about it like, no, it was sad because it was a murder. I want to encourage it to push beyond and say, no, it was sad because it was a martyrdom. He was killed wasn't just murdered out of like some random act of violence. He was murdered in service to a cause. And so, the lesson that we should draw from it should not be the lesson that we would have drawn if it had been just a murder, right? We don't honor him appropriately if we don't talk about the reason that he was killed. And again, to hear people talk about it, it was only disturbing because it was for the same reason it would have been shocking if any human being had been murdered on TV. Or it's only worth condemning because he was a human being murdered. Like, oh, you shouldn't cheer for anybody, for anybody's murder. Like, of course not. But why are they cheering? Because he was a martyr in a cause. And the truth is if action is not taken against this foe, unless people go to war against this foe, in another few months, another innocent family will be grieving. And I just mentioned above all the different wrongs that are taking place, that all the losses that this enemy is inflicting upon the citizens of the United States, and they will continue to inflict those wrongs. They will continue to suffer those losses unless serious action is taken. And you say, well, aren't we supposed to? I listened to a seminary. It was supposed to be training pastors, and they wanted to get all the students together and talk about this thing that had happened and how they were all grieving it. And they started by reading from Romans chapter 12. And in Romans chapter 12, they're talking about, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Don't repay anyone evil for evil. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Don't take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. So they say all that as if that is sort of what we should all be careful about right now. That we're not repaying evil for evil. Like, it's like a deeply unserious reflection on these passages. Our church has spent a lot of time in the Sermon on the Mount this year. It's like there's a difference between taking personal revenge and insisting on your government enforcing, executing justice, administering justice in your land. For example, he says there, leave room for God's wrath. The very next chapter really should be looking at Romans 13, where he says, your rulers are the servants of God who have been put in place with a sword to punish evildoers. He says, they are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So I want to point that out to you. We as Christians are not only hoping for justice to be done someday, though we do have total confidence in that happening. But right now, we are looking to the servants of God who have been put in place to punish evildoers with the sword. We are calling upon them to be agents of God's wrath. So we're asking our leaders to pick up the sword. We are not, when I say this is a case for Christians to reject calls for peace and unity, my point is not that we should pick up the sword. Sword is not ours to pick up, brother and sister, until we are called upon by our leaders to aid them in this fight. Our job is to implore our leaders to do what we elected them to do and what God put them in place to do, to pick up the sword and to protect their people. People want to say, like, now's the time to put away our anger, but it is a sin, and Christians have historically understood it to be a sin, to see evil and not to be angry at the outrage. Okay, and the Bible talks about anger in different ways. Okay, so you can't just pick one favorite verse about anger and then then call everybody to hold to this arbitrary standard that you've set up. There's sinful anger and there's righteous anger. There's righteous things to do when we're feeling angry. Anger is like a fire. It's like gasoline that drives us to action. Anger is fuel for action. That's one of the reasons we get so frustrated. At least, I feel frustrated this week because you feel anger and you're ready to go. Like your whole body is telling you it's go time. It's time for action. And right now there's very little that we can legitimately do, at least as far as I can see. And hopefully God gives you wisdom and shows you things that you can do that are meaningful, that are significant, that are helpful. And I hope you'll share those with me and with our church. But there's a lot of things that we may not legitimately do in our anger. And so we need things besides anger. We need the anger, and if you don't have the anger, then you're deficient in virtue. But in addition to anger, we need other things. So anger plus virtue plus wisdom plus love plus patience plus faith is a recipe for the action that we need. So we need anger to fuel our action, but we need other things to guide it in its course. So people say, well, I know we're supposed to love our enemies as Christians. Well, again, we've talked about that in the Sermon on the Mount this year. We will love our enemies as God helps us. We will wish them well. To love them means I sincerely wish for their well-being. And you can kind of take the killer himself. I think we tend to see more clearly, ethically, though I think we are a ethically stunted generation. We do not have the wisdom that is able to parse out right and wrong as we should. I'm speaking for myself as well. And in those times, sometimes it's helpful to see the cases that we can see clearly. I think we tend to see more clearly in the case of the killer. What do we wish for the killer? Do we wish him well? Yes, we do wish him well. We wish for him to repent. We wish for him to turn from sin. We wish for him to be saved. We sincerely do not wish him evil. And we also wish him dead as the righteous reward for his actions. And in fact, we would say there's no contradiction between those two things, because we see what he's done and we say the best thing for his soul is to face a speedy execution. That is the best thing for his soul. And if you don't agree with that, you're disagreeing with God. Okay? And we do the same thing on a smaller level with discipline all the time, right? When I punish my children for wrongdoing, or you punish your children for wrongdoing, what we're doing is, out of love, we're saying the best thing for your soul is to face evil consequences for your evil actions. And so this coalition of evil that we've talked about needs to be destroyed. People need to go to war with them. Our leaders need to go to war with them. And we should love them, even as they are punished. And we should call them to repentance, to receive forgiveness, and also to pay the price for their actions. Now, many indeed are the Christians who feel that all of this is too political. I don't know exactly how we got to this point where we see politics as somehow a completely useless endeavor. I've heard pastors from Sunday say something like, what we need right now is not, the answer isn't politics. And like, basically, this isn't a question of politics. It's like, I don't know how we got to the point where right and wrong have nothing to do with politics. Again, there's some situation we tend to see it more clearly. Like we see it more clearly with the issue of abortion, for example. But to be completely unwilling to engage politically, I think, is almost always, again, a deficiency in some virtue. And I am no great lover of politics, and it's something I often would rather just stay out of entirely and go on and live my life. But what I'm doing there is I can feel that that's actually a release, that I'm actually letting myself off the hook for something. I'm going easy on myself. I'm not asking myself to do the hard thing. You're fooling it. Almost nobody is staying out of politics because that's the hard thing to do. They're doing a principled thing and making a principle. I'm making myself, I would really love to be involved in all that, but really I'm going to say it's not right, and I'm going to go do something else. For almost all of us, it's the easy thing to do, just to stay uninvolved. There's almost always a deficiency in wisdom, love, courage. Not all political issues are created equal. Some of them are not moral in nature. If they want to put a bunch of roundabouts in our town, I'm no big fan of driving in roundabouts, but if they want to do that, that's political decision. I'm not going to get too worked up about that, even if I don't like it. But of course, there are some political issues that are also moral issues, and this is one of them. And that's fine. Let's be honest, it's fine if you don't want to be involved in this fight. That's okay. I think it's okay for some people to sit on the sidelines. It's not everybody is meant to be a soldier in every war, right? In any war, we only send some people to fight it. It's a battle that none of us should wish on anyone. I don't pretend myself to be ready for anything. I don't know. My few experiences in life of coming up against law and coming against strong opposition, violent opposition, have not convinced me that I'm ready for anything. I hope I would be, but it's understandable that you don't want to be part of a fight. But you should not pretend. If you do choose to sit on the sidelines, if you choose that's where your stage in life is, or that's what you're prepared for, whatever, that's fine. But don't lecture others or pretend that you are more godly or more loving or more gospel-centered or more evangelistic than those who would gladly put their lives on the line to make your freedoms secure. That's not the case. Now, some people, even online, I saw some people say, well, what about witnessing? Aren't we, what about witnessing to these people? Aren't we supposed to be a witness to them? Again, this is witnessing. This is witnessing. Too often we think of witnessing as doing all things in a calculated way to win this person over so that in their will they become more favorably disposed towards me and my ideas and more likely to embrace them. I'm trying to win them over. And that is just not what our job is to do in witnessing. We can do that as much as we're able to. And I've never met a witness who wasn't trying to do that. But just being on the side of right is a witness to the truth. Being on the right side is part of our witness. Taking the right side in this war, in this battle, is part of our witness. So this is a problem that should be handled by those who took our votes and took our dollars and accepted a mantle of responsibility to protect us. The time is here. They ought to protect us, and we are within our rights to call upon our leaders to pick up the sword and defend us. I don't have a sword. It's not my job. I have not accepted that mantle of responsibility. I voted to give it to people who said they would protect us, and now it's their time to protect us. So what should we hope for? I've just said a lot to say what we don't want right now. I think it is not wise or good for Christians or for any citizen to accept calls for peace and unity with the enemy right now. Instead, we should hope to see our leaders treat this like a domestic war on terror. to identify the enemy, to clearly identify the enemy as the enemy, to punish the enemy by imprisoning, by executing, by doing, using all the power of the law to punish, to dismantle structures of power, picking them apart the way you would pick apart a terror network overseas, to seize assets, to cut off recruitment pipelines, to punish supporters, to criminalize certain actions, to put certain things beyond the pale, and to honor those who fight this war, and to encourage it, and to call upon the citizens and to show citizens ways that they can legitimately be involved. I would say this week there are tens of millions of Americans who are chomping at the bit, eager to be involved and to lend a hand and to be useful in the fight against this enemy. And so if I could speak to our leaders, I would ask them, first of all, to pick up the sword and to defend us, to fight for us, to rip this threat out from our nation's fabric, and to call upon volunteers, to call upon people to help in a meaningful way. Christian politics are not useless. They're not useless. They're not made to be laughed at. They are part of God's plan for us, part of his good plan for us. And political problems call for political solutions. Okay? So, I've heard, again, well-meaning Christians saying things like, the only hope for America is revival, for people to get saved. I think I know what they mean. I know what they mean. That's true. We want that. That would be wonderful. But our hope, our hope is not to say, well, we're not going to live in a country where it's safe for all Christians to worship and to exercise their liberties and to enjoy our heritage in our country until virtually all people in America are Christians and there's been that deep of a revival. No, it's not necessary. That's never been the case at any point in the past. But in the past, there's always been a line of what is unacceptable. People say like, oh, so what, we're in a cancel culture now? Like, yes. Okay, it was always wrong to criticize cancel culture in principle. Our culture has always canceled some people. In other words, there have always been certain opinions, certain ideas, ideologies, actions, perversions that were beyond the pale. That if that was you were not fit company, you were not going to find a respectable job, you were not going to have any power or weight in society, you probably weren't even going to have a vote, that you were essentially an outsider. You were alienated for those views. And that is what we owe to our neighbors. That is what we owe to our children, to remove those voices from their ears. So the good thing, I would say, is that almost everything that we would call upon our leaders to do is already covered by existing laws. To me, that's just the great tragedy of it, is that in a country like ours, virtually everything is illegal. There's a law about everything. The only question is, why won't we enforce these laws against these lawless enemies, against lawbreakers? They're already lawbreakers. And what we need are our leaders, our political leaders, to give us a political solution and to crush this enemy. So what should we do as Christians? I've just said what we should hope to see our leaders do. But what should we do as Christians if we're rejecting calls for peace and unity? Well, first of all, we should pray for victory in the war. We should pray for the destruction of the wicked. And what's more than that, we actually hope for more than that. We hope for the conversion of the wicked. We should even hope for the conversion of Charlie's murderer, and Charlie would want that himself. We should implore our leaders to act and withdraw our support for them if they will not. The leaders who will not pick up the sword to defend their people is the most basic responsibility of their leaders. If our leaders will not pick up the sword to defend us, they delegitimize themselves. as our leaders. You should proudly identify yourself with a team. I'm not saying that you're going to be able to be a Charlie and to go out and sit outside in the most hostile environment and literally take on all comers and say, I'll talk to anybody about anything. That may be too big of an assignment. Charlie's a very rare person, and almost nobody is going to be able to be that person. But you can identify yourself with a team. You can identify yourself and let people know and connect with others. Use every tool at your disposal to put pressure on the enemy. All of us have a different scope of authority, position in society, a role that we can play. At the very least, you should do your utmost to protect your children and your family from these people, from these enemies. And use every tool that you have to put pressure on them. Be ready to boycott. Be ready to identify enemies. Fire your enemies. Withdraw from them. Withdraw your fellowship from them. And then stay angry enough to be ready to act if our leaders call upon us. So the thing about anger, especially for us men, a lot of times we have this big explosion of anger. We have explosive anger. It roars up like a explosion, and then a little bit of time passes and it fizzles out, and we're just kind of back to the status quo. And many people are like that. A month from now, we all have that tendency. A month from now, we just won't feel as strongly about this as we do now. Maybe you felt a similar way after the assassination attempt against President Trump. How long did that last? If you don't get any action, something to do, your anger will just fizzle out and it will work itself out in your normal everyday life, and you'll just kick the dog or something. But instead, we have to, again, by adding to our anger all the other virtues of wisdom and love and patience and faith. Basically, we're able to control our anger, keep it from becoming something sinful, but basically say, I'm not going to stop thinking about that wrong. I'm not going to stop thinking about it. Justice must be done. Those who are guilty need to be called to account. I'm not going to forget about it, and I'm ready. I still have enough anger that I'm ready for action. And network with your brothers. Talk to your brothers and sisters about this. I've been very encouraged. I've talked to some of you, and some of those conversations have been very, very helpful to me to see that I'm not alone in these, in the sadness and the grief and in the anger. And we should pray for our leaders. Pray for our leaders. Ask God to move their hearts, to give them wisdom that's greater than mine or yours. We need leaders who are wiser than we are. And I don't pretend to know. I don't know. I don't know enough about the law. I don't know enough about politics. I don't know enough about the judicial system to know how you go about working justice. But I do see clearly enough to see that there's an enemy that needs to be destroyed. And so, brothers and sisters, I would call upon us to, in our heart, to wish for peace and unity, and have that always ready. So I'm very ready to make peace. I am very ready to be unified under the right conditions. God bless you.